Marcus' stomach dropped. What? Detectives want to hold you for questioning, she said flatly. They're on their way now. Lawson stepped forward, his voice sharp. Hold on. No charges, no warrant. He's not under arrest. Reynolds' jaw clenched. You heard dispatch. They want him held. It's not our call. Marcus' chest tightened. He didn't know what was happening, but he could feel it. The night had just taken a turn he never saw coming. Marcus' mind raced as he stared at Reynolds. This wasn't just a traffic stop anymore. This wasn't just about suspicion or an old record. Something bigger was happening, and he had no idea what it was. Lawson took another step forward, tension rolling off him. You don't have the authority to detain him without cause. Reynolds exhaled sharply, gripping her radio. I'm following orders. Marcus felt his pulse hammering in his ears. He could see it now. Reynolds wasn't in control anymore. Whatever dispatch had told her had shifted everything. She wasn't just being aggressive out of bias or power. She was reacting to something she hadn't expected. And then, in the distance, another set of headlights appeared, moving fast. A black, unmarked car. Marcus' breath hitched. Whoever was coming, it wasn't regular patrol. The car screeched to a stop a few feet away, and two men stepped out. Suits, not uniforms. One older, grey at his temples. The other younger, moving with purpose. Detectives. The older man locked eyes with Marcus, then turned to Reynolds. Officer, step away from him. Reynolds stiffened. You said. I know what I said, the detective cut in. He pulled out a badge and held it up. Detective Harris, Major Crimes. Major Crimes, Marcus' stomach twisted. Lawson folded his arms. What's this about? The younger detective, still watching Marcus closely, finally spoke. Mr. Tate, do you know a man named Damien Holt? Marcus blinked. What? Damien Holt. He hadn't heard that name in years. The younger detective exchanged a glance with Harris before turning back to Marcus. He was arrested tonight in connection to an auto theft ring. He named you. Marcus felt the air leave his lungs. That's not possible. Reynolds crossed her arms, her confidence returning. Guess his old record wasn't a mistake after all. Marcus snapped his gaze to her. I haven't spoken to Damien since. He cut himself off. Since the arrest. Since the case that had nearly ruined his life. Harris stepped closer. We're not charging you with anything. We just need to ask you some questions. Marcus swallowed hard. This wasn't how he thought his night would go. Lawson took a breath and looked at Marcus, his expression careful. You have the right to refuse. Marcus knew that, but something in Harris' tone, in the way the detectives had shown up so quickly, told him this was serious. If he walked away now, it might not be over. He glanced back at Reynolds. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something behind her eyes, something he couldn't quite place. Was it frustration? Or something else? Harris stepped back, waiting. The decision was his. Marcus exhaled. Then he nodded. All right, I'll answer your questions. The detectives moved toward their car, Lawson stepping beside Marcus as he followed. As he walked past Reynolds, she spoke just low enough for him to hear. Told you, you got lucky. Marcus didn't stop, but as he climbed into the unmarked car, one thought stuck in his mind. Asterisk, was this really luck, asterisk, or was something else at play? The car ride was quiet at first. Marcus sat in the back seat, his mind still spinning. He kept going over Damien Holt's name, trying to make sense of it. He hadn't seen Damien since the day they both got pulled into that mess years ago. Marcus had walked away from it, but apparently Damien hadn't. And now, somehow, his name was caught up in it again. Detective Harris glanced at him through the rearview mirror. I know this is a lot to take in, but we need to be sure. When was the last time you spoke to Holt? Marcus exhaled. 5 years ago. The night I was arrested. After that, I cut ties. The younger detective, who had... Marcus felt the weight in his chest start to lift, but it wasn't gone completely. So why did Reynolds act like I was guilty the second she saw my record? Harris sighed. Some officers look at a name in the system and think that's all they need to know. He didn't say more, but Marcus got the message. The car pulled into a small lot outside the precinct. Marcus expected to be led inside, but instead, Harris turned around and handed him a business card. You don't have to come in. Just take this. If Holt or anyone from his circle reaches out to you, you call me. If Reynolds gives you trouble again, you call me. Marcus took the card, staring at it for a moment. He wasn't used to cops having his back. But Lawson had stepped in when things didn't feel right, and now Harris was telling him the same thing. He nodded. Thanks. Harris gave him a firm look. Stay out of trouble. Marcus stepped out of the car, breathing in the cool night air. He hadn't realized how tense he was until now. As he walked toward his own car, he spotted Lawson still parked nearby, watching. Lawson rolled down his window. Everything good? Marcus let out a small, tired laugh. As good as it can be. Lawson gave a short nod. Take care of yourself, Tate. Marcus got into his car and sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. The night had gone from routine to chaos in a matter of minutes, but in the end he was still standing. As he pulled onto the road, the city lights stretching ahead of him, one thought stuck in his mind. His past had almost pulled him back into night, but this time he wasn't letting it win. Marcus clenched his jaw. He could feel the frustration rising, but he forced himself to stay calm, because the system doesn't clear it automatically. I didn't steal anything. They figured that out pretty fast. Lawson stepped forward, his eyes narrowing slightly. Were you convicted? No, Marcus said, shaking his head. I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. They let me go. Reynolds let out a small breath, like she didn't believe him. Or maybe she just didn't care. Still raises questions, doesn't it? Marcus felt his fingers tighten into fists at his sides before he forced them to relax. No, it doesn't. Lawson studied him for a long moment. Then he turned back to Reynolds. If there was no conviction, it doesn't justify anything beyond a basic stop. Reynolds didn't respond right away. The muscle in her jaw twitched, and for the first time, Marcus saw something else in her expression. Frustration, maybe even anger, but not at him. At Lawson. You're really going to undermine me in front of him? She asked, her voice quieter now, but sharp. Lawson didn't flinch. I'm following protocol. Reynolds let out a slow breath, then shook her head. Fine. She turned to Marcus, eyes cold again. You're free to go. Marcus didn't move right away. He could still feel the weight of the moment, the way Reynolds was gripping the edge of her belt, how her shoulders were still too tense. It didn't feel over. He reached for his car door, forcing himself not to rush. Every second felt stretched, like something could shift at any moment. Then Reynolds took a step closer. You got lucky tonight. Marcus froze, his fingers resting on the door handle. He turned slightly, meeting her gaze. And then, before he could respond, something else happened, something no one expected. Marcus held Reynolds' gaze for a second longer, her words hanging in the air like a threat disguised as a warning. His grip on the door tightened, but he forced himself to stay calm. He had almost made it out of this. He wasn't about to let one last comment pull him into something worse. But just as he was about to open the car door, the radio on Reynolds' shoulder crackled to life. Unit 12, we've got a call from dispatch. They need an update on your stop. Reynolds barely moved, but something about the way she shifted told Marcus she didn't want to answer. Lawson glanced at her, then at the radio, his expression unreadable. She hesitated, then pressed the button. Unit 12, stop is clear. Subject is free to go. A brief pause. Then the dispatcher's voice returned, more urgent this time. Copy that, but we've got a note here, stand by. Reynolds frowned. For what? Another pause. Then a different voice came over the radio, this one deeper, more authoritative. Reynolds, hold your position. I need you to confirm the name on that license again. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. He looked at Lawson, who was now watching Reynolds carefully, as if he was putting pieces together in real time. Reynolds pressed the radio again. It's Marcus Tate. Why? The response came fast. We just got an alert from a detective downtown. He says he needs to speak with you immediately. Something about a case related to the subject. Marcus' breath caught. His pulse pounded in his ears. Reynolds exchanged a glance with Lawson. Her posture stiffened again, but this time it wasn't just tension, it was something else. Uncertainty. Lawson stepped forward. What case? He asked the radio. A static-filled pause. Then, not sure, but they flagged it urgent. Marcus swallowed hard. He had no idea what was happening, but one thing was clear. He wasn't going anywhere yet. Reynolds turned back to him, her expression unreadable. Stay right where you are. Marcus exhaled slowly. I thought I was free to go. Her eyes flickered with something. Hesitation, maybe. She didn't like this either. But instead of answering, she turned back toward her cruiser and muttered something into her radio, too low for him to hear. Lawson stepped beside Marcus, lowering his voice. Do you have any idea what this is about? Marcus shook his head. None. Lawson's expression was tight, like he was debating something. Then he turned toward Reynolds. We need more information before we detain him any longer. Reynolds ignored him, still focused on whatever was coming through her radio. Her grip on the device tightened, her fingers turning white. Then she turned around, her face unreadable again. "Tate, turn around and put your hands behind your back."
It was supposed to be a routine drive home. The night was calm, the streets mostly empty, and the only sounds were the low hum of the engine and the occasional flicker of streetlights overhead. But for Marcus, that peace shattered the moment he saw the red and blue lights flashing in his rearview mirror. His heart sank. Another traffic stop, another moment of uncertainty. As he pulled over to the side of the road, his mind raced through every possibility. Had he been speeding? Were his taillights out? He knew he hadn't done anything wrong, but that didn't stop the familiar knot of anxiety from tightening in his stomach. For black men like Marcus, a simple traffic stop could turn into something much more serious. He took a deep breath, placed both hands on the steering wheel, and waited. Then she stepped out of the squad car. Officer Reynolds. Blonde hair pulled back tight, a sharp gaze that carried something more than just authority. Her posture was rigid as she approached, flashlight in one hand, the other resting near her holster. From the moment she reached his window, something felt off. "License and registration," she snapped, barely looking at him. Marcus nodded, keeping his movements slow, controlled. "Sure, officer. Can I reach for them?" He'd been taught from a young age to always ask first. She scoffed. "You don't need to ask. Just do it, unless you have something to hide." The way she said it, the way her eyes lingered on him, made Marcus uneasy. He passed her the documents, watching as she scanned them with an expression that quickly twisted into something colder. "Step out of the vehicle." His stomach dropped. "Is there a problem, officer?" "I said step out of the vehicle. Now." Marcus hesitated. He knew his rights. He hadn't been given a reason, hadn't been told why he was being pulled over in the first place. But the way she was staring at him, hand inching toward her belt, he knew this wasn't the time to argue. Slowly, he unbuckled his seatbelt and stepped out. The night air felt heavier than before. She circled him like a predator assessing its prey. "Driving a nice car," she muttered. "Where'd you get it?" Marcus clenched his jaw. "I work. I bought it." She smirked, shaking her head. "Sure you did." A tense silence hung between them. Marcus could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the quiet threat behind her words. He had seen this play out before, on the news, in viral videos that never seemed to end well. He didn't know what was coming next, but one thing was certain. This was no ordinary traffic stop. And then, just as the moment stretched unbearably long, something happened that neither of them saw coming. Something that would change everything. Marcus could feel the heat rising in his chest, but he kept his face calm. He had learned long ago that any sign of frustration could be taken the wrong way. His fingers twitched slightly at his sides, but he didn't move. He just stood there, watching Officer Reynolds as she tilted her head, as if she was waiting for him to react. "Hands behind your back," she ordered. His heart pounded. For what? She took a step closer. Suspicious behavior. Marcus inhaled sharply, steadying himself. "I haven't done anything wrong." His voice was even, controlled, but inside, every nerve was on edge. Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "So now you're arguing with me." She glanced over her shoulder, as if expecting backup to arrive any second. Typical. Typical. The word cut deeper than it should have. Marcus could feel his pulse in his throat. He wasn't sure if she wanted him to resist, to give her a reason to escalate things. But he wasn't going to. He couldn't. A car passed slowly on the other side of the road. He thought about waving it down, but what good would that do? No one ever wanted to get involved. He could see the driver's face, a middle-aged man, watching, curious but uninterested enough to keep going. Reynolds sighed, tapping her fingers against her belt. "I don't have all night," she muttered. "You got anything in the car I should know about?" Marcus clenched his jaw. "No." "Mind if I take a look?" He knew his rights. She needed probable cause or his consent to search the vehicle. He could say no. He should say no. But something in the way she was standing there, the way she seemed so sure that she would find something made him hesitate. "If I say no, what happens?" he asked carefully. Reynolds gave a slow smirk. "Then I call for backup. And we wait. Could be a long night for you." Marcus exhaled, looking past her for a second, staring at the blinking police lights reflecting off his car's surface. He could refuse. He could stand his ground. But he knew how these things went. He had seen enough stories just like this one. Before he could respond, another voice cut through the thick tension.
Everything okay here? Marcus turned his head just slightly, his breath catching in his throat. Another officer had arrived, a man, taller than Reynolds, walking toward them with a cautious but firm stride. Reynolds straightened but didn't turn around. "Yeah, I got it handled," she said quickly. The male officer glanced between the two of them, then at Marcus. "Sir, are you all right?" For the first time since the stop began, Marcus wasn't sure what to say. He wanted to believe this was a sign things were about to change, but something about Reynolds' expression told him that whatever happened next wasn't going to be simple. Marcus felt a flicker of hope at the new officer's presence, but he didn't let his guard down. The way Reynolds had tensed up, the way her fingers curled into a fist for just a second before she relaxed, it told him everything. She wasn't happy about the interruption. The male officer, his badge reading Astjeet, Lawson, stepped closer, his eyes flicking between Marcus and Reynolds. "What's the situation here?" His voice was calm but firm, like he was already sensing something wasn't right. Reynolds exhaled sharply. "Routine stop. Suspicious behavior. I was about to conduct a search." Marcus didn't miss the way she chose her words carefully. Suspicious behavior. Not an actual violation, not an offense, just an excuse. Astjeet. Lawson studied Marcus for a moment. Did he consent to a search? Reynolds hesitated. It was quick, but it was there. Not yet. Marcus met Lawson's gaze. "I was about to say no." For a split second, the street felt impossibly quiet. The hum of distant traffic, the occasional chirp of a passing car alarm, the soft rustling of trees, it all faded into the background. The real weight of the moment settled between the three of them. Lawson gave a slow nod, then turned back to Reynolds. "If there's no probable cause, we're not searching his vehicle." His tone was measured, but there was no mistaking the authority in it. Reynolds' jaw tightened. "It's procedure." "No," Lawson corrected, his voice unwavering. "It's a judgment call, and I don't see a reason to escalate this." Marcus could see the battle playing out in Reynolds' eyes. She wanted to push back, wanted to challenge him, but she didn't. Instead, she took a slow step back, her face unreadable. "Fine," she muttered, "but I want to run his license again." Lawson didn't object, but Marcus caught the briefest shift in his expression. Something about this wasn't sitting right with him either. As Reynolds walked back to her cruiser, Marcus finally exhaled, barely realizing he'd been holding his breath. Lawson stayed where he was, hands on his hips, studying Marcus with something different in his eyes. Not pity, not suspicion, something else. "You live around here?" Lawson asked, his tone softer now. Marcus nodded, "A few blocks down." Lawson glanced toward Reynolds' car, watching as she sat behind the computer, her face partially illuminated by the screen's glow. "Do you know her?" The question caught Marcus off guard. He shook his head. "Never seen her before tonight." Lawson hummed, almost like he was thinking something over. "Just sit tight for a second." Marcus didn't have much choice. He stood there, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on him. His heart had slowed, but the unease hadn't left. If anything, it had deepened. Then, from inside the cruiser, Reynolds' expression changed. She stiffened, her eyes narrowing at the screen. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment, then started typing faster. Marcus couldn't see what she was looking at, but he knew. Something was happening. And whatever it wasn't good. Marcus felt the tension in the airshift. It was subtle, but it was there, hanging between the flashing lights and the silence that stretched just a little too long. Reynolds was still staring at the screen in her cruiser, her fingers tapping out something Marcus couldn't see. Whatever she had found, or thought she had found, was enough to make her posture stiffen, her lips press into a thin line. Cheat. Lawson must have noticed it too. He turned slightly, his stance shifting as if preparing for something. "Officer Reynolds," he called, his voice even but firm. "Everything checking out." For a second, she didn't answer. Then she pushed open her door and stepped out, the glow of the laptop still reflecting off her face. "He has a record," she said flatly. Marcus' stomach dropped. "What?" Reynolds held up a hand like she expected him to stay quiet. "An arrest from 5 years ago. Suspicion of auto theft." Marcus blinked, his mind scrambling to keep up. Then it hit him. That's not. He cut himself off, exhaling sharply. That was a mistake. The charges were dropped. Reynolds crossed her arms. "Still on record."